In October 2020, Kenny Hart, an investigation sergeant with the Benicia Police Department, sat alone in his office, thinking about what to say. Benicia is a town of about 30,000 on the northern outskirts of the San Francisco Bay Area, about a 40-mile drive from the Golden Gate Bridge. In 26 years as a cop, Kenny had seen it all. Homicides, violent crimes. He had patrol duty, a stint with a coroner's office, and with a sheriff's department. He was even pulled in on tips related to the infamous Zodiac killings. And during his career, he had made more than his fair share of death notifications. But he wasn't sure any of that prepared him for the call he was about to make.
I've never delivered this kind of notification, so I'm about to change a family's life forever. I had to prepare what questions I was going to get asked, and I had a whole bunch of questions. My head was spinning at that point in time. And I remember calling Paul. He didn't answer. So I left a voicemail.
Hi, Paul. It's Kenny Hart with Benicia PD. Can you give me a call back at 351?
Kenny was trying to reach Paul Wulff, a longtime college football coach who once led programs at Washington State and Eastern Washington. But Kenny had only known Paul for a few months when they connected about a case that had captivated Kenny like few others in his career.
There was a little relief that he didn't answer because I don't know if I was fully ready to give that news yet. And I'm sitting in my office just like, wow. I had my door closed because I didn't want to talk to any of my detectives. I didn't want to be distracted because I knew the phone was going to ring probably at any point in time.
Kenny tried to steady his thoughts and select his words for when Paul called back. 41 years earlier, in July of 1979, Paul's mother, Dolores Marie Wulff, vanished from her home in Woodland, California, a quiet suburb of Sacramento about an hour's drive from Benicia. She was never seen or heard from again. That's why when Paul called Kenny back, it was a conversation that neither man will ever forget.
I think it was about 5 minutes later, he called me back. And he goes, "Hey, Kenny." The first words out of my mouth were, "Paul, we found your mom."
My name is Kyle Bonagura.
And I'm Adam Rittenberg. This is a story about a woman's disappearance, but it's really the story of a search, a relentless pursuit by a relentless group of people.
I said, "Wolf, you killed her. You know it, I know it, and everybody else knows it.
We're going to start a holy rain of hell on him."
You can tell me or the police tomorrow where she's at, or I can blow your head off.
But without finding Dolores, would there ever be justice or closure? Would her story fade into the night, just like she did in 1979? 4 decades later, one phone call would change everything. From Free Range Productions, this is The Unforgotten, Season 3, Finding Dolores Wulff. Episode 1, Life of the Party.
The first time I heard Kenny Hart tell the story of how he found Dolores Wulff, he was in the same chair where he made that call to Paul. It was the fall of 2020, and Adam Rittenberg, my colleague at ESPN, and I were on Zoom, completely captivated by what he was telling us. Kenny wore a blue polo shirt with an embroidered badge that read Sergeant, Benicia Police. Behind him, a corkboard showed photos of his family, one of him in uniform, and a black and white photo of a woman with dark hair and a big smile. Adam and I saw it immediately. This was Dolores Wulff. We didn't know it back then, but Dolores' story would pull us in unlike anything we had reported on before.
Kyle and I spent the next 10 months working on a piece for ESPN.com, focused on Paul Wulff, the college football coach. Our story was published in August of 2021, but Kyle and I couldn't stop talking about it. We were captivated by the events that led to Kenny's call to Paul, and by all of the people connected to this case. We wanted to tell the complete story of what happened to Dolores, her disappearance, the search for her, and the incredible events that occurred in the years that followed. We will do that over the course of this podcast. The center of the story is Woodland, California. Technically a Sacramento suburb, Woodland has always had its own identity. Nicknamed the City of Trees in the 1930s, it's a place where Victorian homes and old oaks line the streets. Woodland has some dense pockets of homes and businesses, but it's also surrounded by a vast agricultural area, filled with farms and ranches, where fertile fields yield almonds, alfalfa, pistachios, and other crops. Woodland is where Dolores Wulff was born and raised. It's where she would then build a life that revolved around her 4 kids and a large family. And it's where she disappeared from on the night of July 31st, 1979. To fully understand Dolores and her life in Woodland, you have to begin with her family's journey. They were people who chose to travel halfway across the world for a chance at a new beginning, and ultimately, the American dream. In 1917, Frank Rocha, Dolores' father, and one of his brothers left the Azores, a small chain of islands off the coast of Portugal, on a steamship to come to America. Settling in Northern California, they became dairy farmers and grew alfalfa outside Woodland. Frank married a woman named Mary, and on November 4th, 1933, they had their second child, naming her Dolores Marie. Here's Dolores' son, Paul.
And again, she grew up not speaking English and had to learn the language somewhere around that first, second, third grade. So, her and her siblings always got put behind a year just because they were raised only speaking Portuguese.
Dolores grew especially close to her youngest brother, Matthew, who later in life became known as Slick.
She's about 4 or 5 years older than I, and she would read Donald Duck comic books to me. We were real tight. Both liked to joke and clown around. I remember one time I was walking by the middle bathroom that most people use, and she's standing in front of the mirror. And she knows I'm coming. And she's looking in the mirror, and she says, "You're beautiful. You're gorgeous. You may be the most beautiful woman in the world." I said, "Knock off that crap."
Several days later, Slick positioned himself in front of the same mirror and waited for his big sister to pass by.
I said, "Wow, you are one good-looking dude." But she's laughing as she goes around the corner. And she sticks her head back around the corner and she says, "Is that mirror lying to you again?"
Slick became an elite athlete in the area. Many thought he could have gone pro in baseball. Dolores, meanwhile, wasn't a natural in sports. But one time, she convinced her brother to come to one of her basketball games.
He said, "I'm the star of the team." I says, "You got to come watch me play. I go watch you play." Crap. Well, I want to watch girls basketball. So I went out there. He never got in the game.
Dolores grew up in the Portuguese community, but she did not end up with a man of Portuguese descent. She met Carl Wulff in the Sacramento area. He was a large man, maybe 6'1", 220, 230 pounds, with dark hair. He had grown up on a farm in Minnesota without running water and had moved to California shortly after high school. They were married in 1955 at a Catholic church in Davis, followed by a 2-week honeymoon back to Minnesota. Carl made a good initial impression on Dolores' large family. Here's Dolores' cousin, Tony Rocha.
He was very nice, as I remember him. He'd go on the driveway. We'd be all playing basketball. He'd come out and play basketball with you, stuff like that. So he was really well liked.
The couple's first child was born in 1957, and they also named him Carl. But everyone would call him Carly. And for the purpose of clarity in this podcast, so will we. Their daughter, Anna Marie, was born in 1959, and as far as anyone could tell, Carl and Dolores Wulff were a happy couple, growing a family together. Tom was born in 1963, and finally Paul in 1967. Here's Tom.
She was the best mother anybody could ever want. Her kids were always perfect, and that's how I grew up. We were always treated with her doing nothing but being positive and praising us and lifting us up. I truly believed I was great because of her. She was in the middle of everything we did. Now, before I drove, she was going to pick us up at the end of basketball practice or football practice or something like that. We figured we'd wait for an hour or two before she made it because she was always late. And we just learned how to live with that. That was just her nature.
This is Dolores' nephew, David.
I remember she was always smiling, always laughing, would pretty much do anything that we wanted as kids. If we wanted to go to McDonald's, she was the one that would take us. If I was going to spend the night over there, she was always for it. And she was always in a good mood, at least when I was around.
After Dolores' kids grew older, she took a job as a secretary to the principal of Woodland High School. And she got to know everyone, from the football team to the faculty to the cheerleaders. Most kids went to great lengths to avoid the principal's office, but they came to see Dolores. Here's Tom.
The troublemakers loved her. The troublemakers were the ones that were in the office, and so she would deal with them. And yeah, some of my best friends were the troublemakers, and partially because they loved her and how that whole relationship was.
Dolores also remained very connected to her Portuguese roots. She served as president of the Yolo Cabrillo Civic Club, which raised scholarship money for high school students of Portuguese descent, and made sure her children understood their heritage. Here's Paul.
We would always go to Portuguese functions, whether they're our relatives or just, they always have Portuguese feed. They call sodas feed, which is this disgusting orange soup with bread. And I would never touch that crap. And, but we'd have all these things where we'd go to, or the Cabrillo Club, which were local Portuguese functions that we were involved in. And, you know, you do dances and those types of things. As a child, we'd do all that stuff.
When we talked with members of her family, they all described Dolores the same way: warm, funny, and devoted to her family and community. Maybe this is naive of us, but when we think of someone who disappears, we often imagine them isolated, unprotected, and vulnerable. Dolores Wulff seemed to have a strong support system around her, but there was another side to Dolores' life, a depressing reality she dealt with in private and occasionally in public. This is her sister-in-law, Janet.
She always had jokes. She was very humorous, but then she had such a terrible sadness and crying over her life with Carl Wulff.
As Janet alluded to, the warmth and laughter that defined Dolores' life masked something much darker. After the break, Kyle will pull back the curtain to reveal the private torment she endured.
No one in the family we spoke to could pinpoint when exactly the marriage started to unravel. But Janet remembers episodes of Dolores crying about how Carl treated her as far back as 1963, when they were pregnant at the same time. This would have been when Dolores was pregnant with Tom, her third kid. Things got progressively worse as Carl's businesses faltered. First, there was a gas station in town, then a U-Haul business attached to it. Those ventures had mixed results, but ultimately failed. As that happened, Carl started drinking more heavily, and those on the Rocha side began to worry about his behavior.
My other cousin named also Carl, he was Carl Souza, he was my mom's nephew. He worked for Carl Wulff at the station. And Carl had went in to use the bathroom while he was working his shift, and he noticed a hole in the wall. And he glanced up there, and he just thought, oh, I'm sure it's nothing. And then he looked, and he realized that he could see right into the office of the station through that hole.
What Tony is suggesting here is that Carl was using the hole to act as a peeping Tom.
That was clearly a sign that we were dealing with somebody that wasn't right.
Another woman we spoke with, who's now 80 years old and didn't want to be recorded for this podcast, told us her husband worked part-time at the gas station. One day he saw Carl push Dolores up against a wall of the station. The man confronted Carl about his treatment of Dolores, but was told to, quote, mind his own business. He never returned to work a day for Carl Wulff again, and didn't even collect his final paycheck. Carl just had a way of making people around him feel uncomfortable. After the gas station failed, Carl began working at the Farm Bureau Insurance Company in Woodland, where he pursued his female secretary despite her clear rejection. She would tell police that Carl parked outside her home to watch her and that she eventually quit her job to get away from him. Here's cousin Debbie Baker.
We would be over there and we'd spend the night and we'd be sitting on the couch and watching TV. And the boys had gone and taken their shower or bath. And each one of the boys would come out in their underwear. We were all kids. But then Wolf would come out too in his underwear. And it wasn't boxers. It was, and to seeing a grown man and you're a kid and him dressed like that. So he was a strange person.
On another occasion, Debbie, who was 23 when Dolores went missing, was getting ready to take a bath at the Wulff house. But Carl tried to make her do it with the door open.
He tried it with me that I couldn't close the door. And then I said, I'm not going to get in the bathtub. And I closed the door and I think I locked it because I was afraid.
Debbie also remembered Carl's drinking, something she witnessed firsthand.
Above the ovens, there was a cupboard and he had vodka bottles and he'd pull that out and just drink straight out of the bottle.
Despite the story about the gas station incident, no one in the family was aware of any kind of physical abuse from Carl. If Carl was hitting Dolores, she never told anyone, and there was no obvious signs, bruises, or anything like that. But that wasn't the case for Tom. He took a lot of physical abuse.
We got into fights. I didn't have much of a chance against him physically at the time, so I didn't get very far. I just kind of took a beating. And then towards the end where I started to fight back, then we got into some pretty tough ones. And the worst one was I got hit across the side of the head and it popped my eardrum and had to have minor surgery on that to fix that.
When Carl and Dolores would get into arguments, it was common for her to call her brother Slick. He would come and get her, and she would stay with him and Janet for a while as things cooled off.
Well, one time she called me up, not long before this happened, to go get her. I went and get her, and as I was leaving, he yells at her, "I'm going to kill you." Well, I didn't think much of that. I felt like I was a wimp. So I didn't say anything. I should have said, "This has haunted me." I should have said right then and there, "If she dies, you die," is what I should have said. But I didn't say anything.
On one occasion, Dolores stayed with Slick for about a month. Then, one day, he returned home and saw her walking out with her luggage.
I said, "Where you going, sis?" "I'm going to go home." I said, "You can stay here, sis. I don't care if you stay here for the rest of your life." And she says, "No, let's see if I can work it out."
The pattern went on for years. Carl and Dolores would fight, one of them would leave, they would stay away for days or weeks, then try to reconcile. In April of 1979, it had gotten so bad at home that Dolores didn't just leave for a relative's place. She got her own apartment in town, about 5 miles away. But all that seemed to do was make things worse. There was a consensus among the family that Carl felt so enraged by the idea of divorce and being forced to split their marital assets that Dolores' moving out had the effect of an animal being backed into a corner. Cousin Tony lived in the same apartment complex Dolores moved to, and one night he received a call from his sister Mary, asking him if he could go to the Little League fields because Carl had used an ice pick to pop the tires on Dolores' car. Dolores' son Carly was already there, but he could use an extra pair of hands.
And I said, "Yeah, I'll help him." So I drive over, I help him. He had to go pick up tires and because she only had one spare. And we fixed them all. Well, we get ready to leave. I go, "Carl, you can go home." She's going back, same place I'm going. I'll follow her back, make sure she gets to her apartment.
When Tony arrived at the complex, Carl was waiting in the parking lot.
Dolores had just pulled into her parking spot. So I put my car in park and I went running towards her apartment because after she ran, he followed her. And back when you're 22 years old and athletic, I beat Carl Wulff to the door and he immediately stopped and started backpedaling. And I said, "Get the you-know-what out of here, Wolf." And he said, "You guys are crazy. I just want to talk to her."
This came just after the family suspected Carl of trying to poison Dolores.
She gave him a key to her apartment. And at one point, he put kerosene in her milk. And the reason we know it's kerosene because she just smelled it. And then she gave it to my sister Mary, and she worked at the health department. She took it to the health department, had it tested, and it was confirmed to be kerosene.
For me, this story was something that I've always had a tough time trying to, to understand. Because even if they didn't believe Carl was going to go through with his threats, the fact that there was kerosene in her milk felt like a clear attempt to kill Dolores. I don't know how else you could look at that and come to any other conclusion.
Right. It shows a level of sophistication beyond a drunk guy, just kind of rambling and making threats. Sometimes not drunk and more direct, but this is a clear attempt, like you said. And, it was brazen. I mean, it was something that I think could have been traced back to Carl Wulff, but also maybe provides a peek inside what he was thinking and how he was plotting to actually have this as an option to get rid of his wife, as opposed to, just the verbal threats against her life.
Yeah, there's a level of premeditation to this. And I think that's really important when you're talking about a potential murder, a disappearance. In some cases, if there's an accident, you could try to explain it another way, but you can't explain this. If there's kerosene in milk, it was clearly put there by a person with the intent to do harm. And to do nothing about that after it was found, there's really not a good explanation for that part either.
Well, yeah, other than the fact that Dolores just had this block against taking the next step, going to the police, filling out a full report about all the threats that Carl had made against her. But to me, Kyle, it makes me again think about her family not taking him seriously. How could you not take him seriously after this was uncovered? That he wasn't just a drunk making threats, that he wasn't just a guy who wanted to avoid a divorce settlement, that this guy was actually capable of doing something extreme, and yet nothing happened from that point. I think that's probably the most difficult part for her family.
Even after he busted Tom's eardrum, Dolores made up a story to tell the doctors that the injury occurred when Tom jumped into a pool. She always resisted further action against Carl, even though she had people ready to act.
Dolores was always saying, I don't want you to tell none of the guys because I don't want the guys to confront Carl. So they were always trying their best to keep her happy because they were worried that he would take it out on her. And yeah, at that point, it was clear that there was major problems and that he did have girlfriends. And at that point is when us guys started talking, and Dolores would beg it. He would say, please don't go beat Carl up. Because I'll be honest with you, there were people in the family that wanted to do harm, and at least make a threat that if you go too far, this is going to happen. Dolores begged us never, never, never to do it. He'll never hurt me. She'd beg and beg and beg. And everybody would tell us, stay out of their business, stay out of their business. So we did.
With people like Slick or Janet or Debbie, Dolores was open about the horrors her husband put her through. But she always seemed to hold on to hope that things could get better, that things could be tolerable. This was clearly a symptom of an abusive relationship. But all she wanted to do was focus on raising Tom and Paul. I drove up to Woodland in February 2025 and met Debbie at her home in town. We sat down at her kitchen table and over a couple hours discussed Dolores' life as her pet cockatiel, Fred, chirped away in the background. May 24th, 1979 is a date Debbie remembers well. It was a Thursday night just before her birthday, and the TV show Barnaby Jones was on at 10 p.m. on Thursdays. Her older brother had just gotten out of the Navy, and she got into an argument with him about who had control of the TV that night. Debbie went to bed, and then, a little bit before 10 o'clock, the phone rang.
And it was Dolores, and she was very upset. She begged me, she goes, will you come over? Because Wulff had called her, and she goes, I'm afraid he's going to show up or something, but would you come over? And I said, yes, and I got dressed, went over there. So it was about 10 or so around that time. And we were sitting there talking, and I was on the couch, and she was in a chair across from me, and I started hearing like the jangle of keys. And then I looked, and I could see the doorknob was moving a little bit. So when I saw the door moving, I went over and looked through the peephole, and I could see it was him. And I said, Dolores isn't alone, I'm here. And then he goes, well, let me talk to you. I want to tell my side of the story. And I asked Dolores, and she let him in. So I opened the door, let him in, and he sat on the couch next to me. And he was just saying that she needed to come back because her kids needed her and all that. And I think I mentioned divorce. And he put his finger in my face, looking me straight in the eye, and he goes, I will see her dead before she gets my property or my kids. And I said, you're threatening to kill her? And he goes, yes, and I mean every word I say. And he left shortly after. Dolores was scared to death.
In the moment, did it feel like the threat was real, or did it feel like it was just him talking and trying to scare her?
No, I really thought he would do it because of the different things he was doing, following her around. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like I could see it in his eyes. He meant it. And I'm not the best at analyzing people, but it scared me. And it worried me a lot. And then a few days later, she moves back at the house, and I believe it was my mom asked, why did you go back? And she goes, because he ignores me when I'm at home. She felt safer being at home with him, and she missed Paul and Tom. He wouldn't let her see him, the kids.
Debbie was one of several family members who heard Carl make threats. There was one in particular that still haunts Dolores' sister-in-law, Janet, more than 4 decades later.
When they were in dispute, Dolores told me, he's telling me he's going to kill me, and I believe him. I said, oh, Dolores, when it's yourself, you don't know people like that in the family. I said, I can't believe he could actually do that. I couldn't believe he could do that to her. But then he starts coming to talk to me and bringing the boys over, and he said, I'm going to kill her. And I said, Carl, you can't possibly mean that. Well, I'm going to kill her. I said, and then she'll be gone, you'll be in jail, and what about the kids? What are you going to do? Well, I know a way to do it and not get caught.
The threats and the tension were building into the hot summer of 1979. After the break, Adam will tell you about when everything boiled over.
On a Sunday afternoon in late July 1979, about 100 people gathered in the parish hall of Holy Rosary Catholic Church in Woodland. They were there to celebrate the 50th wedding anniversary of Antone and Anna, Dolores' uncle and aunt. We tracked down some Super 8 film of the party, a 3-minute silent clip that offered a rare glimpse into Dolores' world. The guests sat at tables covered with white tablecloths and drank from styrofoam cups. About halfway through the footage, Dolores appeared in a bright blue dress, a white flower in her dark hair, standing next to her father, with cousin Tony holding his infant daughter nearby.
We had a blast. My parents' 50th, relatives, a hall full of Portuguese people, basically, and a few others. But we had a great time.
The night before, Dolores had helped make sandwiches with some of her cousins and arrived early the next morning to set up with Debbie, who had collected some 7-Up bottles for centerpieces.
We wrapped them in gold foil and we were putting daisies in them. Dolores and I were in the bathroom, and the only people there were Dolores, my mom, and I, and my mom was in the hall. And Dolores goes, I'm going to be an opera singer. And she starts singing like she's at the opera. And my mom comes in and she goes, God, what is there, a moose calls? And we just started laughing. But see, that's how Dolores was. Dolores couldn't make anybody laugh. Her personality, you could be at a funeral and Dolores could come in and make everybody laugh.
Dolores' outgoing personality was on display throughout the party. She flashed her big, toothy smile as she enjoyed time with her family. Woodland was the type of place at that time where the local newspaper, the Woodland Daily Democrat, published a brief story with a large headline and photo about the party, listing many of the family members in attendance. Tony remembers everyone having a good time. But off to the side, a man stood alone, tending the bar, but not really talking to anyone. Carl Wulff didn't look like someone who wanted to be there.
The whole time Wolf bartending, they had a bar set up. You could tell they're on the outs. He's behind the bar the whole time. Dolores is out mingling with all the family, and he's behind that bar. And he's not leaving behind that bar because I think at this point he kind of felt like an outcast. So I didn't go up to the bar, but everybody else did. But you could tell right then and there, glancing, watching, that they were on the outs. They were on the outs big time because I don't even know if they even talked. They didn't drive there together. I know that for a fact.
The party marked a celebration of Antone and Anna and their marriage, but for Dolores, it provided a brief reprieve from her own. She had moved out of the house on the outskirts of Woodland a few months earlier, and had only recently returned to be under the same roof as Tom and Paul, who were then 16 and 12. Carly and Anna Marie had moved out but lived nearby. The Wulffs were in marriage counseling, but the problems in their home weren't going away. Carl had threatened to kill her multiple times, both to Dolores' face and in front of her family. Those threats had been mostly written off as the ramblings of a spiraling alcoholic. But Dolores expressed real concern, especially when talking with her sister-in-law, Janet.
Oh, she said it more than once. When she would be over there staying with the two boys, he told me he was threatening to kill her. I mean, I'd stay up at night with her and let her talk. And that was when it first started. But he said to me, if that happens, promise me you'll take care of my boys. Of course, I said, that's not going to happen.
Dolores was a devout Catholic, and the idea of divorce was still taboo for some in the church. Even if she knew in her heart that her marriage was over and expressed that to others, she felt a looming sense of obligation to try and salvage things. Before Dolores moved back in with Carl and the two boys, she had actually filed for divorce, but it was something not many people knew.
We were having a good time at the party, and later on, he wanted to go home. And so she finally went because he was demanding, and he can make the whole party miserable if he wanted to.
Dolores went home with Carl, but she soon returned to Debbie's house to pick up some leftover sandwiches from the party.
They had a big fight at home before she came over, so that's why she came late. And she parked across the street, and she had her bags of sandwiches, and I walked her to her car because she asked me to, because she was afraid she didn't like the dark. And I walked her to her car, and I stood there. She drove away, and I stood there and watched her till she turned the corner. And that's the last time I ever saw her.
That was a Sunday night. 2 days later, Woodland was sweltering in the summer heat. By late afternoon, temperatures had soared into the high 90s. In a marriage counseling session at 4:30 at the church, Dolores indicated things with Carl were going well, but he did not agree. Carl told the therapist that he was disappointed with the state of their marriage, but they did not discuss the threats he had been making or anything that made the therapist concerned about Dolores' well-being. Carl and Dolores drove separately to the counseling appointment. When it was over, Carl swung by the grocery store to pick up bread and milk. When he got home, he mowed the lawn. Neither of the kids who lived at home was home that night. Tom, the 16-year-old, was away at a week-long basketball camp in the Bay Area, and Paul was spending the night at Uncle Slick and Aunt Janet's house, celebrating his cousin David's 13th birthday. That left Carl and Dolores alone. What happened that night would change a family forever. While the details of exactly what happened will likely never be truly understood, one thing was clear by the next morning. Dolores Wulff was gone.
This season on Finding Dolores Wulff.
Right away, I just said my dad did it.
Everything we could do to make his life horrible, we were doing it.
I've been involved in a lot of crazy things, but at the end of the day, he's still your father.
He's in jail. I got to get him out of jail. Pretty soon, I'm sitting on the stand and I'm getting accused of murder. How in the hell did we get to this point?
The Unforgotten is a free-range production. Season 3, Finding Dolores Wulff, is written and hosted by Kyle Bonagura and me, Adam Rittenberg. The story is edited and produced by Wes Ferguson. the executive producer at Free Range. Audio editing by Aislinn Gaddis. Audio production and sound design by Austin Sisler with Eastside Studios in Austin, Texas. Special thanks to ESPN.